In 1984, a team of archaeologists excavating burial mounds in Dickson, Illinois, found something that quietly shook the entire field of human health science. They were looking at two populations buried side by side. One group were hunter-gatherers who had lived in the region for thousands of years. The other were early farmers who had replaced them around 1,000 years later. The difference between the two sets of skeletons was staggering. The hunters were taller by several centimeters, had denser bones, larger skulls, and almost no signs of chronic disease. The farmers were shorter, had weaker teeth riddled with cavities, smaller frames, and clear skeletal evidence of metabolic stress. Switching to farming had made humans measurably, physically worse. And buried inside those bones was the first clue to one of the most important questions in modern medicine. How did the human body learn to get fat? And why does it seem so disturbingly good at it? The answer doesn't start with sugar or processed food or laziness. It starts with a molecule. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your body isn't broken and why that realization is far more unsettling than you think. Insulin is a hormone produced by specialized cells in your pancreas called beta cells. Think of it as the body's master storage manager. Every time you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar rises, insulin is released, and it tells your cells to absorb that glucose. What they don't use immediately gets converted and stored in muscles as glycogen, in the liver as glycogen, and when those are full, in fat cells as triglycerides. The more frequently insulin is released, and the higher the spike, the more aggressively your body shifts into storage mode. This system didn't evolve to make you fat. It evolved to keep you alive. For most of human evolutionary history, food was unpredictable. Homo sapiens emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago, and for the overwhelming majority of that time, they ate whatever they could find, whenever they could find it. Some days, a successful hunt meant several thousand calories. Other days, nothing. The body had no idea when the next meal was coming, so it developed a ruthlessly efficient solution. Eat as much as possible when food is available. Store every excess calorie that isn't immediately needed. And release that stored energy slowly during the inevitable periods of scarcity. This wasn't a flaw. It was the single most important survival mechanism the human body ever developed. The individuals who stored fat most efficiently survived famines. The ones who burned through calories too quickly died before they could reproduce. Generation after generation, the same brutal selection applied. The human genome became increasingly optimized for one thing: storing fat as efficiently as possible. This theory, proposed by geneticist James Neal in 1962, is called the Thrifty gene hypothesis, and it explains something that puzzled scientists for decades. Why do modern humans gain weight so easily, even when they're not eating that much? Because our genes are still running 300,000-year-old software in a world that changed almost overnight. But that raises the question that should be bothering you right now. If fat storage genes were that dominant, that aggressively selected for why weren't ancient humans fat? The answer is the environment. For 290,000 of those 300,000 years, the conditions that trigger runaway fat storage simply didn't exist. Hunter-gatherers walked an average of 12 to 15 kilometers per day. They lifted, climbed, sprinted, and carried. Their food was dense in nutrients, but required enormous caloric expenditure to obtain. Even on high-calorie days, the body burned most of what it consumed. The storage system was constantly activated but never overwhelmed. Fat was deposited and then mobilized again within days. The system worked exactly as designed. This was the baseline, the default, the starting point for everything that came next. Then, around 10,000 years ago, something happened that the human genome had no evolutionary precedent for. Agriculture arrived. It spread out of the Fertile Crescent in the Near East, moving westward into Europe and eastward across Asia. And it changed not just what humans ate, but how they lived at a fundamental level. Farming populations became sedentary. They no longer needed to travel to find food. The food was in the field, and the field required them to stay. The average daily movement dropped dramatically. The hunt, which had demanded hours of sustained physical effort, was replaced by planting and harvesting, which required effort in bursts but far less sustained cardiovascular output overall. But the dietary shift was even more significant. The diet of early farmers was built almost entirely around grains. Wheat, barley, millet, these foods did something no food in the hunter-gatherer diet had done in such concentrated form. They caused rapid, repeated, large spikes in blood glucose. Every meal sent insulin flooding into the bloodstream. And insulin had one job: store the excess. With less movement to burn through glucose and more glucose arriving from grain-heavy meals, the storage system that had kept humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years began running in permanent overdrive. But here's what makes this story genuinely surprising. Early agricultural humans weren't actually obese. Not yet. The portions were small. The work was still physically demanding by modern standards. And chronic food surplus was rare. The Dickson mound skeletons were sicker and shorter, but they weren't fat. So if the metabolic trap was already set 10,000 years ago, what finally sprung it? The answer is a second revolution, far more recent and far more radical, beginning in the mid-19th century and accelerating explosively after World War II. Food processing industrialized. Grains were refined. Sugar was extracted, concentrated, and added to nearly everything. Portion sizes expanded, and for the first time in human evolutionary history, extremely calorie-dense, rapidly digested food became not just available, but cheap, abundant, and engineered to override the body's natural satiety signals. The hormone leptin, produced by fat cells, normally tells the brain that you have eaten enough. But ultra-processed food is designed to be consumed faster than leptin can signal. The hormone ghrelin, which triggers hunger, resets faster when blood sugar crashes after refined carbohydrates than it does after whole foods. The ancient storage system, optimized to never miss an opportunity, had no defense against an environment built to exploit every one of its triggers simultaneously. The Thrifty gene, the insulin response, the fat storage mechanism that had saved human lives through 1,000 famines, were now running uninterrupted in a world of permanent abundance. And the result was the steepest rise in obesity in recorded human history. But here is what makes this story even more complicated. Not all populations responded the same way. Pacific Islander populations, who spent thousands of years navigating open ocean with extremely unpredictable food access, developed some of the most aggressive fat storage genetics on Earth. When those same populations were exposed to Western processed food in the 20th century, obesity and type 2 diabetes rates became among the highest in the world. Native American populations showed near identical patterns. Their genomes had been shaped by thousands of years of extreme feast and famine cycles, with virtually no exposure to refined carbohydrates. Biologists call this a population-level mismatch. The environment changed faster than evolution could respond. Different populations, shaped by different histories of scarcity, all converging on the same metabolic crisis through entirely different genetic pathways. The same problem, solved by the same broken mechanism, appearing independently across the world. Which means obesity isn't one thing that happened once. It is the collision of 300,000 years of survival programming with an environment that has existed for less than 200 years. Remember those skeletons buried side by side in Dickson, Illinois, the hunters and the farmers? The hunters weren't healthier because they had better willpower. They weren't leaner because they tried harder. They were healthier because the world they lived in hadn't yet turned their greatest biological strength into their most dangerous vulnerability. The body isn't broken. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The problem is that what kept our ancestors alive is now quietly killing us. And in the next video, we're going to look at what happens inside your brain when that ancient system is pushed past its limits and why the answer has nothing to do with discipline.